Hello.
Our story begins after Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, and Anakin exited Mortis. The three of them looked at each other, not realizing that for everyone else in the galaxy, only a few seconds had passed by. For the three of them, they had just been in a timeless void for what they believed was a couple of days. Not everything from Mortis was remembered, but the father, son, and daughter were. Anakin and Obi-Wan's interaction with the ghost of Qui-Gon, and a number of other things were remembered as well. Obi-Wan and Anakin had a mutual mindset about everything as they slowly sped towards the Resolute. Ahsoka, on the other hand, felt so weird. She felt that she had been resurrected to some kind of degree, but she didn't know exactly how. When they arrived inside the ship, she excused herself from her masters and walked to her quarters. She felt faint in the head as she made her way to her room, and when she arrived, she decided to lay down for a little bit. When she put her head on the pillow, a wave of relaxation washed over her, and she was able to feel a sense of serenity until she fell asleep. Her dreams typically were fairly vague. There wasn't too much she locked onto. It's not that she didn't remember them, it was just they were more forgettable. They mostly repeated what she experienced on the daily, and by this point in the war, it didn't affect her like it did when she was young. Well, younger. Ahsoka fell into her sleep, and after a couple of days, or whatever they were on Mortis, she was relieved to finally have some sort of peace. When her dream began, she simply went through a field of haze. She didn't know where she was, but it felt so familiar. There were whispers swelling around her, and she looked at what it could be. But there was nothing. The voice of terror reminded her of the sun, but that couldn't be possible. She looked up and saw the tower from the planet she was just on. It confused her, so she looked back around looking for a way to escape from this hellish place again. But she couldn't. Instead, she saw the sun walking towards her in a mocking way, before telling her to hurry along. Father was expecting them inside the palace. The sun morphed and flew into the air. Ahsoka didn't know what to do, but without control over her dreams, she followed suit. She figured out how to lucid dream in the past, but she typically didn't do it. Most of the time, she got bored of being able to lucid dream, and she'd rather see the plot unfold in front of her. That's what she did here, and she wished she hadn't. She followed the sun up the stairs, and when she followed him in, he was launched into the wall. He was forced to his knees, and Ahsoka followed suit, dropping to the ground. Stress radiated out of her body, and she broke into a cold sweat. Her eyes darted up into a soulless gaze of a woman. Ahsoka didn't know who or what she was, but it scared her half to death upon viewing it. She looked over to the sun, and a wave of electricity seized her body, and a voice not belonging to her cried out in agony. It was at this point when she realized that this wasn't a dream, it was a memory. Ahsoka watched the father swoop in, and within a swift stroke he banished this creature before his eyes to a place far away. He turned to his children and asked if they were alright, and before a response could be heard, Ahsoka saw the face and jolted from her sleep. Her breath was heavy and her eyes were bloodshot. She dragged her legs over the side of the bed and took a deep breath. Feeling the cold floor beneath her feet shot a wave of coldness up into her body, and it felt much better, but her heart rate was still out of control. She looked over at her bedstand and saw that she'd been sleeping for a little more than 4 hours. It wasn't much, but for being a warrior, she couldn't take any sleep for granted. Ahsoka got up and walked over to the mirror to wash her face, and she turned on the faucet as she placed her hands under the chilled water as she raised them to her face, and when the water slipped off of her face, she looked into the deathly eyes of someone she did not recognize. Ahsoka stole back, and a wicked voice called over her back. It told her that she may have been temporarily saved, but nothing could spare from the wrath of a god. Ahsoka woke up when her body slammed onto the cold floor of her room. Her stress couldn't be overstated. She winced as she reached her arm across and looked around. Her chest heaving as she slammed her hand on the ground a number of times looking for her lightsaber. She couldn't find it as she rolled over and used her one open eye to pull it with the force, using her connection to the kyber crystals to get it to her hands. She wasn't awake yet, but her eyes were bloodshot just as they had been in the dream, but anything was only visible from one eye. She was smacked in the face with one of the blades as she grabbed the other one and ignited it. She grabbed the bedstand behind her and started to pull herself up, and then she turned to see if she could find the creature. Ahsoka realized she was safe, and her weapon dropped out of her hand, and she leaned against the stand and slowly leaned back over onto the bed and put her hand over her heart. It continued thumping as if it would bounce out of her chest. Ahsoka had a continued lineup of stressed dreams, but nothing nearly this bad. Most of them were survivable. She could typically handle them, but this was much different. Usually a stress dream was failing at an assignment, missing a cue in front of her master, or repeating the same death on the trooper she was next to on Ryloth, during the ground assault at least. Ahsoka didn't like those dreams, but she had come accustomed to them at this point. This creature was much worse. Her hands gripped her arms and she hugged herself for a moment and reminded herself it was just a dream. It was just a dream. Ahsoka was able to perk back up after a few moments, and she prepared to go to the bridge to talk to her master about the dream. But when her eyes looked at the clock, it showed that it was the middle of the night. Contrary to the dream, she actually got around 6 hours of sleep, which was much better. However, it was technically the middle of the night for the troops. Most ships were programmed to Camino time, regardless of where they were. It just meant that the troopers had to adjust to whatever battlefront they were on. Ahsoka leaned back into the bed and grabbed a hollow tablet and read over it. When she had downtime, she read some books that made their way into her line of sight. It was the simple things, getting lost in different worlds to escape the war when she wasn't training. She was able to get into the novel she was reading before getting back to sleep. When she woke up, she felt the relief of the stress dream that wasn't nearly as bad as the one she had in the middle of the night. Ahsoka made her way to the bridge and saw Master Skywalker and Kenobi. They told her that they were about to meet up with the rest of the fleet and station themselves. Ahsoka nodded her head and asked about their encounter, and they both turned to her in a way that suggested they weren't to talk about it until they returned to the temple. Kenobi looked at Anakin and he started over to Ahsoka and spoke to her quietly so that only she could hear him. In essence, they weren't going to be discussing what had happened on the planet they were just on, until they all consulted the Jedi Council regarding the incident. She asked why, and he told her that it was simply because they didn't know what it was. Obi-Wan theorized that they had a collective vision, or a shared one, just an experience that they could only see together. Anakin, on the other hand, believed it actually happened, but he was unsure. He asked Ahsoka for her thoughts on the matter, and she shrugged her shoulders, telling him that she'd be in her room until she was needed. Anakin watched as she walked away. When she left the bridge, Anakin went to Obi-Wan and told him that Ahsoka seemed really unnerved by what happened. He suggested that she would be alright. Ahsoka was tough, and that was in part to Anakin's training of her. He just needed to trust her. She would handle this adversity well. The truth is, she didn't. They would be away from Coruscant for a little over 3 weeks before they finally made their return. Ahsoka's nightmares only continued to get worse. Calling them nightmares was truthfully generous. Nightmares would bow down to them because they weren't just horror-filled, they were extremely stressful. Ahsoka wore bags under her eyes and she was getting sloppy in training. Anakin took notice of this, but she suggested that she'd be fine. She just wasn't sleeping well. Anakin kept giving her time to rest and time to sleep, but every time she laid down, she couldn't focus on sleeping. Her mind raced and raced and raced until she got overly tired and passed out. Ahsoka was truthfully struggling with this a lot, and Anakin could tell. The reason they were able to get back to the temple early is because Anakin pushed for it. Upon their return, the three of them would collectively go to the High Council and speak about their encounter on Mortis. The council took all this information presented to them, and in quick succession, they all, for the most part, expected it to be some sort of force anomaly, or if anything other than that, a collective force vision shared between the three of them, as Obi-Wan suggested. They understood that the force worked in mysterious ways, and believed that it was just another example of that. Yoda specifically believed that they should take the lessons they learned from their experience and meditate on them. Perhaps they would come to a conclusion of the event being a shared meditation or vision, and understand that everything they encountered was meant to guide them to a new path. Though something that got the attention of both Yoda and Plo was a discomfort sitting behind Ahsoka's eyes. She was only 16 at the moment. She wore the event a lot heavier on her face. When she was asked about it, she told the masters in the chambers that she'd been having nightmares. She didn't know how or why, but they were taking over her life. Plo spoke up from the corner of the room, asking her what her dreams were about. She was extremely honest, telling them that she believed they were memories of the person that wasn't her. While the other two Jedi hadn't really made a mention of the ones, Ahsoka was the first individual to recall ever seeing them. She told Yoda that she encountered the father, a son, and a maternal figure. She didn't know who they were, but the maternal figure was someone who told her that she couldn't escape. Anakin and Obi-Wan turned over to her, this being the first time they heard about it. While Ahsoka expressed how badly her nightmares had gotten, no one knew that they involved such things. She only said that she was tired because of her dreams, and how they had gotten worse. Anakin understood because of the nightmares he could have, but because nothing was said about her version of them, he just assumed they weren't that bad. Clearly that wasn't the case. Yoda looked on in confusion. It'd been a long time since he'd learned of the ones, or even heard of them. Every couple centuries, the Jedi would discover them in the archives and become inquisitive. It was how the Lost 20 became the Lost 20. Pretty much the first 15 or so Jedi became so enamored with finding the ones that they left the Order to go and find them. Of course, the other 5 were Jedi like Dooku, who left for other reasons, but 2 of the Lost 20 that Yoda encountered before Dooku were so interested in finding the ones, so that's what they did. They left the Order and were never seen again. Yoda didn't want that fate to be Ahsoka's fate, so he suggested that she meet him in the archives later that day. Most of the council members knew about the ones to some extent, but by some extent, it was just simply that they existed. Yoda, being alive for so much longer and having to deal with members disillusioned by their mere existence, had to know more about them. Everyone was subsequently dismissed. Yoda, of course, learned that the ghost of Master Qui-Gon had approached Anakin and Obi-Wan during their shared endeavor on Mortis. To the council was even more proof of the fact that the Force was still so unknown to them, and that the mysteries of the Force would continue to be unraveled at one point or another. It showed the complacency of the High Council. Regardless, in the coming hours, Yoda would meet with Ahsoka down in the archives. She was actually sleeping when he got down there, her arms placed on the table and her head placed on top of them. Yoda didn't wake her up, instead he sat down on the chair next to her and pulled up a number of images articles and holocrons that the Jedi had about the Ones. He would tell her about them. Since she was still sleeping, he thought that he should see if she was telling the truth. He felt bad for doing this, but he did it because he wanted to help her as best as he could. He turned his attention to Ahsoka and closed his eyes, reaching out with the Force and becoming one with her vision. He could hear the voice of Qui-Gon, but no audible words came out. Yoda watched the battle of light and dark taking place, but Ahsoka was nowhere to be seen. There was a woman fighting for light and a man fighting for darkness, and a man in the middle of all of it. The battle shook the ground until the Elder Man stopped the fighting with his mastery of the Force. Yoda heard a scream in the distance. Someone had drunken from the font of power and bathed in the pool of knowledge. The daughter and the son ran past Yoda and turned back, asking their fathers if it was true. He told them that it was, and suggested that they flee from the area before she arrived. Yoda looked up and saw a terrifying beast rise up into the clouds and vanish. He was confronted with the face of the woman with a creature, who told him that he and his order would be crushed by an unstoppable force. He was thrown out of the dream before Ahsoka jolted up. Her skin trembled and her hands shook as she turned to Master Yoda and apologized for startling him. He just looked at her in shock and told her that it wasn't her fault. Yoda did as any Jedi shouldn't, fear what the future held. He told Ahsoka the information within the text of the Order and everything the Jedi knew about the Ones and the creature known as Abeloth, or the Mother. Ahsoka recognized the name, but she had never retained it from any of her dreams. When she heard the name, it sent chills down her spine. Yoda told Ahsoka that she would be staying here for the time being, expressing that he needed to instruct the Council on their next steps moving forward. As Yoda made his way back to the Council chambers, rather speedily, he could hear Qui-Gon's voice and he stopped. The voice told him that there were mysteries of the Force that he had yet to learn. Those mysteries could be shown to him if he allowed himself to become open to them. Yoda stopped and turned his head, calling out Master Qui-Gon's name, but this elicited no response. He continued to the Council chambers and told them that despite Skywalker's success on the battlefront, he wanted the boy to be trained by the Council immediately. He was to be pulled from the active war front and he'd be kept here on Coruscant inside the Jedi Temple. The Council was confused as to why, and Yoda expressed that he suspected the Mother was returning from her captivity. She'd be here to destroy the light and kill everyone. If Anakin was meant to be the chosen one, as Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka suggested from their time on Mortis, then he needed to be prepared to be the one. The Council didn't realize it, but Yoda was giving into fear. He couldn't stand the idea of his order falling victim to the power of this creature. He then told them that while Skywalker was continuing his training, he would take Ahsoka off-world for the time being. He believed that she'd been taken over by one of the spirits of the Ones. He wasn't sure, but because Ahsoka wasn't physically present in her dream, he knew that it had to be for a reason. She was seeing someone she never met and experiencing things that never happened a millennia ago. She was experiencing memories of someone who she became one with. Despite Yoda's theories being correct, the Council thought he lost his mind, and they were worried for him. Yoda had only become privy to this at the beginning of the war, but it was something that Qui-Gon knew before the war started. Yoda had only become privy to this at the beginning of the war, but it was something that Qui-Gon knew before his death. Yoda was only now catching up, and the truth is, it was pretty much too late. Yoda needed to have been where Qui-Gon was years ago. He quickly tried to make up for lost time, but it was incredibly difficult of a task to do with the war so present. But Yoda just wanted to make it clear to the Council what he wanted to be done before he left. As he and Ahsoka prepared to leave, he was again approached by the disembodied voice of Qui-Gon Jinn. The voice told him to take young Tana to the Dagobah system. There they'd begin their journey. Yoda didn't know what this meant, but he took the information and decided that he would listen to it. Perhaps if it was indeed Qui-Gon, he should follow his steps. It was a humbling experience for Yoda. For centuries during his younger life, he was told by his masters that he was the chosen one. He had the highest midichlorian count seen in pretty much anyone. Since then, he was considered the wisest of the Jedi, and up until Qui-Gon's death, it seemed apparent that he was, until he himself realized that Qui-Gon may have been the wisest Jedi he'd ever come across. One who was ahead of the curve, like Dooku, but also concentrated and wise enough to follow the light rather than be consumed by the darkness. Yoda took Ahsoka to a small T6 Jedi shuttle and took off. During their trip, Yoda and Ahsoka spoke more, but he could see that she was fading in and out. She was too tired from not being able to relax and sleep, so Yoda helped her. He told her that if she went to sleep, he could use the Force to protect her mind from the memories of someone else. She took the offer, and for the entire duration of their trip from Coruscant to Dagobah, she could rest, and it was wonderful. Upon their arrival at Dagobah, they followed bouncing lights that spoke to them into a cave. They went as one, which only allowed their vision to be shared with each other, confirming for Ahsoka what had happened on Mortis really actually happened rather than being a trick by the Force or simply a vision. They experienced something real on Mortis. As their vision began, Yoda saw the future, Order 66, the Jedi fighting Sidious, and the death of Windu, his order and everything he loved. Ahsoka saw this too, though her extension of that vision was something she couldn't possibly remember, and it was how she had died on Mortis. Corrupted by the son, she was then given life not just by the daughter but Anakin, who helped the daughter transfer her life into Ahsoka. This in turn made the owl Morai incredibly loyal to Ahsoka, but she hadn't encountered the elusive bird on her journey yet. Ahsoka's visions moved forward, and it was what she could never imagine. The fight between good and evil, and it was a reunion of sorts between the Ones, except they had been since replaced with other figures. Being that the Ones had all but perished on Mortis, she saw this all as terrifying. They continued forward and left the cave to meditate. There was peace here on Dagobah, but the planet was so rich with the Force, even the dark side, one of those hives of Force sensitivity in the galaxy. It existed all over the planet and emboldened the Force within both Yoda and Ahsoka. They were able to tap into something that they should have been able to tap into their entire lives. Life on Coruscant almost prohibited it, so with the nature surrounding them, they could find it. As they were meditating, Ahsoka accidentally morphed into a Gryffindor, and it scared her because she didn't know how it happened. She looked to Master Yoda, and he asked her if she was okay, and she suggested that she was, but she didn't want to stay in this predicament for much longer. She told Yoda that she wanted to get out of this, and he tried to help her. It was a bit awkward, but also comedic. Ahsoka calmed down, slowed her heart rate, and then figured out how to return to her normal form. She raised her hands and looked at them, telling Yoda that she felt powerful, unlike ever before. He looked at her and agreed. It wasn't negative power either. She vibrated with the light. Qui-Gon would give them instruction to head to deep space, where they would meet with the wills of the Force, a journey that, unlike their time on Dagobah, would take up an extended period of time. Everything in this nebula of the Force felt normal in time, but outside, that time began to increase. This was not by accident. Had Yoda come alone, then the time would have passed by as it normally should have. With the Daughter of Light present, time began to increase at a faster rate. Yoda and Ahsoka had their encounter with the wills of the Force and learned their lessons with the powerful wise priestesses. Inside the Jedi Temple, Anakin questioned why the Council was, for no reason, taking more interest in him, but they didn't disclose anything. They simply said he was a chosen one and went forward with it. Obviously that wasn't the case, because if it was, they would have had more interest in him when he was younger. With Anakin away from combat, the 501st was reassigned a number of different Jedi generals to work alongside Captain Rex, who was now promoted to commander in the absence of General Skywalker. Yularen loved not having Skywalker around, but for the men who fought alongside him, it was a much different story. Some of the Jedi the clones were put under were either Masters Tiplar Tiplee, rotating away from their normal unit, Quinlan Vos when he wasn't active in combat, or Pong Krell. Pong wouldn't get involved with the clones until before Umbara. Luckily for him, he'd be rerouted and Quinlan would help the 501st with taking Umbara. The attack would go smoothly, but for Skywalker, who had now missed out on several months of the war, was getting testy. He wanted to be with his men. Not for nothing, he was growing exponentially. He was going up with the most talented in the Order on the daily. Whether it was spars with Mace, Plo, Depa, Agan, Saci, Kit, or Kiadi-Mundi, he was getting plenty of experience with the lightsaber. He was able to use this experience to become a true user of the blade. He lost some of his darkness, but with the help of Mace, he redirected it. Inside of the nebula, Ahsoka learned some of the powers that belonged to the Daughter and really understood what it meant to be a representative of the light. Unlike Anakin and his duty to the Ones on Mortis, Ahsoka accepted a responsibility bestowed upon her, as if the Daughter knew that she would accept the role of the Daughter and fulfill her in the afterlife, something the father was incredibly disappointed with in Skywalker. He knew the future, and it involved one of two scenarios: Anakin becoming Vader, or Anakin losing the one he loved most in the universe. All is as the Force wills. Ahsoka and Yoda learned much about the Force and themselves, while here at the Wills, though the only challenge that continued to hit them in the face was whether or not the Order would be saved. Truthfully, by this point, Ahsoka didn't care about the Order. She was bonded to the Force, something the Jedi clearly weren't. Yoda was concerned for his Order because the last thing he wanted was the destruction of everything he loved, and what terrified him more is the fact that Skywalker is being turned into the most proficient user of the blade in the entire galaxy, while also learning an array of Force powers that he had never learned before. If Anakin's choices on Mortis meant he would become Vader, then Yoda just made him the destroyer of worlds. He'd be unstoppable, being that he was the chosen one. This too did have Ahsoka worried, but if Anakin was meant to embody balance as the father did, then it'd be alright. Light in the Force is balance, and as that is the truth, Anakin should hold such traits. If not, then the light would die and be consumed. Well, more consumed than the darkness that had already covered the galaxy. Yoda and Ahsoka prepared for their return, but they were redirected to another location, which would affect Ahsoka much more than Yoda. They'd head towards the Sith homeworld of Moraband. When they arrived, Ahsoka felt incredibly weak, but they moved forward, facing the ghosts of Darth Bane and even Sifo Dyas, who was nothing but an apparition created by the Sith of the day. Both Ahsoka and Yoda were wise enough to avoid it until they both came across dark versions of themselves. Those versions of themselves brought them to the temple after the execution of Order 66. There were dead Jedi strewn about. Both Ahsoka and Yoda reacted to it as they ran to the side of those who were hurt, but as it turns out they were all dead. They were then approached by Katuni, who took them to a time of peace, where Ahsoka and Yoda reacted to Dooku being next to Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. For Ahsoka, this was weird, but it was entire lineage in front of her. Anakin walked up to Master Dooku and placed his hand on his shoulder with a smile. He wasn't missing a forearm, and they all turned to Ahsoka and Yoda with joy. A short discussion developed until it was realized by both Ahsoka and Yoda that this wasn't real. Everything fell out from under them, and they woke up in a vision at the industrial sector, which led to a couple of scuffles and the disappearance of Sidious. It was a really troublesome experience, but it had Ahsoka suggesting that they go to the industrial sector upon their return to see who they could find. Yoda wasn't exactly on the same page with this. Truthfully, he believed it was a waste of time because the Force was always in motion. Motion's motion. Come on, the end of all their problems could literally just be a field trip away from the temple. Sounds like they'd have to give it a shot, at least according to Ahsoka. When they arrived, a lot had changed, most specifically the fact that the Jedi Temple had been bombed. This was done by Barriss Offee, and she was already caught. Luminar Unduli, Barriss's master, found out who did it when she was looking for Barriss one evening. It was a very dishonorable day for the Jedi, and it sucked the life out of them, especially Luminar. Anakin, on the other hand, was becoming more and more the chosen one, though much like his time on Mortis, it continued to be done reluctantly, which is something that would stress Yoda out upon his return to the temple. Though something positive was the 501st over Cato Nemodia. Because the Jedi General wasn't pulled from the middle of a siege, they were able to make quick work of the Separatists. Quinlan was rerouted there to assist their assault, and so were Tiplar and Tip Lee. The battle was going well, and it was squeezing the Separatists and the Trade Federation out of the core, which would be a crushing defeat for the Separatists this late in the war. When Yoda and Ahsoka went to the industrial sector, they couldn't find anyone, but they found relics, which for Yoda only convinced them that the Sith hadn't been here in a long, long time, probably since before Qui-Gon's death. She didn't believe him, but he wasn't eager to stay anyways. This left Ahsoka extremely dissatisfied, because they had the Sith right where they wanted them, and the Jedi Grand Master continued to neglect something that could clearly rip the fabric of the Jedi Order and the galaxy apart. Regardless, they returned to the temple with disappointing results. This would sit on Ahsoka's shoulders for days, especially because she was convinced it would get them somewhere. Because Yoda was back, Anakin was finally allowed to leave the temple, and so he went out to talk to Palpatine. Obviously, he snuck out to see Padme, but he couldn't sneak out during the day to see Palpatine. Come on, don't be ridiculous. He was able to now talk to Palpatine about what happened and everything he learned. He even told him that Ahsoka was gifted powers from a legendary Force being named the Daughter, which he was excited about for Ahsoka. He didn't expect Palpatine to know any of this. He was just kind of talking about it and being happy about it. But Sidious was extremely worried. He knew that if Ahsoka was indeed the Daughter, then he would have no powers against her. He needed to face his potential extinction, so once Anakin left all happy and stuff, Palpatine requested Dooku to Coruscant immediately. He was considering doing something rather unthinkable, but the power of the Daughter was far too powerful for him and Dooku. If Mother Talzin was still around, the two of them could face the power together. But that wasn't the case. Even though she was kind of still around, it was kind of complicated, but dark magic was something else. The main point being is Sidious needed aid to fight off Ahsoka, and his only hopes were either the ghost of Mother Talzin, if that was a thing, or calling upon Abeloth, which is something he didn't want to do. She was more powerful than the Daughter, and that meant more powerful than him. So would it really help? But all who achieve power are afraid of losing it, and so was he. Dooku arrived by the end of the night, and they began a ritual. Ahsoka on the other side of the city wasn't sleeping. Instead, she was in a meditative peace. She found a way, with the help of the Wills, to find her peace in the greater universe. These meditations allowed for her to tap into the Force in a way she never had before. Her boundaries extended far beyond her original. She could feel all the light on the planet, but she could also feel the pulls of darkness. And she felt that darkness coming from the industrial sector because it was overwhelming. She ran to Yoda's room and woke him up, telling him what she was sensing and feeling. Yet, he denied her feelings, suggesting that she hadn't sensed it. Wow, nice gaslighting. They'd already checked the industrial sector. It couldn't be true. This turned into a fully fledged yelling match, mostly from Ahsoka. Instead, she went to Anakin, who was wandering around his room anyways, and he was down. The master and apprentice duo, stronger than ever, but having been separated for so long, prepared for their first mission together since before Mortis. Ahsoka told Anakin a lot since she had returned from her time with the Wills, and he wholeheartedly trusted her with this endeavor. When they arrived, it was dark as if no one was here, but there was another vessel in the landing bay. Ahsoka and Anakin snuck into the halls and heard people talking. Their eyes landed on a blue flame with two silhouettes standing next to it. Anakin ignited his lightsaber and started forward. His training prepared him for this moment. This stopped the Sith from the ritual, and they turned their attention to the two Jedi walking in. Ahsoka didn't ignite her weapons. The Force was her ally now, and being that she was one with a daughter, she could do unspeakable things. Sidious and Dooku looked at the two who approached them and expressed that they shouldn't have come. Skywalker used the Force to throw their altar over, and a massive blue blaze ignited, covering the only other exit out of the room. Anakin spun his lightsaber in his hand, preparing for action. But Ahsoka didn't have time for this. She told the Sith that their oppression would come to an end here, and she slowly closed her eyes, calling upon the Force within her. They always spoke of how darkness was more powerful, but nothing could ever conquer the light, maybe diminish it, but the Force seeks the light, and the light is balance. And for the Force and Ahsoka, that'd be the case here. Her hands slowly raised from her sides, and the two Sith stopped in their place, dropping to the knees as Ahsoka fell to her one knee. Her hands dropped to the floor, and she held herself up. She looked up as both Sidious and Dooku felt their arms and hands. What had she done to them? Sidious reached for his lightsaber, but the weapon was too heavy for him as it slid out of his hands and onto the floor. Dooku wavered a little bit as he tried to raise his hands and shoot lightning at Skywalker. Nothing happened. Ahsoka stood up, and she told Anakin that it was done. He turned his attention to her and realized what she had done. Sidious tried to grab the weapon from the ground, but there was nothing he could do. Ahsoka vanquished the darkness. She took the dark side of the Force and turned it into light, and because both Sidious and Dooku were so reliant on the dark side, she stole the ability for them to use the Force, period. They still had their bad intentions, so Ahsoka told Anakin to move out of the room, as she shoved him down the hall. Within a moment, she morphed into a Gryffindor and smashed the support beams in the room. As a messenger of light, she wouldn't kill them. She let gravity decide their fate. The ceiling slammed down, killing the two ordinary men who once held the fate of the galaxy in their hands. She ran out as Anakin booked it upon seeing the monster behind him. When he ignited his weapon to face the beast that ate Ahsoka, she morphed back into herself and smiled, suggesting that they had to inform the Council of what happened. Anakin was so confused, but he asked if they could go figure out who the other Sith Lord was. They'd be unnerved once they uncovered the rebel with the fire still around, that it was Chancellor Palpatine. They'd have to tell the Jedi Council about their discoveries. Ahsoka was extremely tempted to leave the Jedi Order at this point, but she decided against it. Her disgust with Yoda would be brought up to the Council when they met. Something that surprised her was the collective council taking her side in the matter. With both Sith Lords literally dead, aside from the existing Darth Maul out in the universe, the Clone Wars could be brought to an end, especially with a politician who wasn't trying to take control over the galaxy. This brought the Jedi to a conclusion. They would simply insert themselves into the Republic when the people couldn't elect a new Chancellor. Also, because the Council turned on Yoda, he was removed from the Council and a new Master filled his role, which would be passed over to Plo Koon. The Jedi moved diligently, and because of Ahsoka's motives and quick thinking, she was seen as a Jedi Knight, making Anakin a Jedi Master, on top of which making Skywalker a Master on the High Council. It was a ton of events that happened in the following months, but it was a result of quick action made by the Order to the news of Palpatine being behind everything. It kind of woke them up to the real dangers and how close they were to being destroyed. It also showed how, despite Yoda catching on to everything Qui-Gon understood, he was unable to do anything about it. His reluctance could have stopped Ahsoka from ending the Sith had she not gone over and done it. As the Clone Wars were resolved by the Jedi-controlled Senate, there were faces who joined different alliances. With Dooku and Sidious out of the picture, Rogue Jedi found home with Maul. This included Barriss Offee, Grand Inquisitor, and Pong Krell. They would all go unnoticed for an elongated period of time, but when they were seen again, they were destroyed very quickly, including Maul. Ahsoka almost left the Jedi Order a number of times, but because Anakin never left the Order and took a lifetime seat on the High Council, she stayed. There was also an addition for Skywalker, which was the birth of the twins, Luke and Leia. A couple years later, followed by another daughter named Lumia, which was a popular name for girls on Naboo. Anakin would be able to sneak off with Padme and go spend time with her and her children on Naboo or Coruscant, but he maintained both lifestyles, including some close friends he brought to show them. He and Ahsoka taught the children everything they knew in the Force, which meant that aside from Anakin and Ahsoka, there were 3 children who were incredibly powerful with the Force, and trained to be as well. The years after the Clone Wars during the Reconstruction would be filled with tension. Despite Maul and his band of traitors, there was a rogue asthmatic cyborg on the loose, until he wasn't. When Anakin was 82 years old and his student just a couple years younger, they found themselves on a completely different High Council. It had been a year since Obi-Wan passed away of natural causes, and nearly 3 since the former Grand Master passed away of natural causes too, which was Plo Koon. Mace Windu was the eldest member on the council at 103 years old, but he wasn't in a position of power. He was a Grand Master for a number of years after the Clone Wars. When Plo decided he no longer wanted the role, he gave it to Windu. When Windu stepped down from the role of Grand Master, he handed it down to Skywalker, who took it with pride. Despite how much good in the galaxy there was, a darkness was rising, and it was the person Ahsoka had dreams about early on in the war. Turns out Sidious was trying to unleash her from captivity. However, he died before he could. Instead, he opened up a hole in the maul that wasn't too large. It meant that Abeloth had to try and break through the hole at the right time. She spent decades trying to get it right, and then she finally did. But then when she left, she realized that she probably shouldn't have ever hoped for freedom, because the death she had wasn't swift, and it came at the hand of 3 generations of Skywalkers and the daughter. Luke and Lomia didn't have any children, simply due to not having any interest in it. Leia only had one child, and her son joined the family in their eradication of the mother. Abeloth came like a bat out of hell, and the family members used the Force to create 6 black holes that ripped her into a million pieces before each user of the Force expertly closed the black holes on her, making sure her time in terror came to an end. With the Sith and Abeloth erased from existence, the light continued to exist in a perpetual state of balance. Before the end of her life, Ahsoka would pass the torch on to Lomia, who wished to represent the light side of the Force, being that she wasn't interested in starting a family herself. Luke would follow in his father's footsteps years later, continuing to represent the balance in the Force. The Jedi, despite their failures during Anakin and Ahsoka's younger years, began to restructure itself around new members who fit it into a modern and ever-changing galaxy. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to Galvin Gaming, Tristan, Darth Revan, Granddaddy Bane, The Last Jedi, Apollo Weebu 670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Malik, Johnny Naguin, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Cali, Galley Slayer 66, Mammoth Studios, Anakin 003, Lord Draken, 46 Star Wars, Erebus, Rex the Wolf, The Man with 3 First Names, Darkstain 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. If you want to support me in other ways, go check out the Patreon. There are other things up there. Early access to the Sith Clone Wars up there. New episodes every Saturday. Talk about the story real quick. So I wanted this to be like a journey for the Force for Ahsoka, kind of like the Ahsoka leaving the Order one, but more powerful. There aren't a ton of listed like powers for the daughter, so I wanted her to feel really kind of powerful. Like I wanted the power of the daughter to really be present within her, but I also wanted to show like Yoda's complacency. I wanted to show like how, despite everything, like the Clone Wars does a great job of showing this, is like he literally like learns where Palpatine's lair is and just never goes there. He's just like, oh yeah, that's where Palpatine is. Let me just not go there. So I wanted that to actually show up in the story without it being like, oh yeah, Yoda has brain now. Like, no, we're gonna keep Yoda brain dead and have Ahsoka and Anakin have this like master and apprentice duo versus the other master and apprentice duo, which would be kind of cool. And then, you know, once Anakin and Ahsoka are like older, like they're the broken ones. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.